Good evening. Apologize if I seem a little less energized than normal. I didn't really get a whole lot of sleep last night. Did you catch what I just did? Did you pick up on that? Not quite. I just made an excuse to try to avoid taking responsibility for my own actions. Tried to defer accountability for what I had done, which in this case really isn't even true. I got a decent amount of sleep last night. Scott, can you help me get my PowerPoint up on the screen, please? When we think about the word excuse, Webster's dictionary defines excuses as to make an apology for, or perhaps more relevant to our conversation tonight, to try to remove blame from. We make a lot of excuses every day, don't we? You know, I was late because of this. I can't do what you're telling me to do because of this reason. I'm sorry I wasn't there. This happened. All right? We make excuses all the time. And the thing is, some excuses work better than others. I'm going to tell you a true story, and I want to emphasize this is a true story. Sometimes you have to say it's a true story because people just can't believe it when they hear it. When I was in high school, there was a guy in my class who, for the sake of the story, we'll call Kevin. And Kevin was always the kind of kid who was getting into trouble. He was always saying something or doing something that he shouldn't do. And so he spent a lot of time one-on-one with the principal in that nice, cushy office. I think the story that I'm about to tell happened my freshman year of high school in our Earth and Physical Science class. For some reason, Kevin decided that morning when he got out that he was going to bring with him to school a tube of ultra-strength Gorilla Glue. And whatever reason, he brought the glue. I don't know if he was planning this ahead of time or not, but I guess he was bored in class that day, so he glued his shoe to the floor. Smothered a bunch of glue on the floor, then stepped in it. A few minutes later, the teacher calls Kevin up to his desk. Of course, by this time, the glue is dried. And so Kevin is stuck. Can't get up. He's trying to explain the situation, and the teacher's just getting mad at him. And you know, we find out that Kevin has this tube of glue with him, and he's like, it wasn't me. Someone else must have done this in last period, and I'm just the victim here. Well, the last period just so happened to be that teacher's planning period. So there weren't any students in that classroom. He was caught red-handed. They ended up having to yank Kevin out of his shoe and literally cut it off the ground with a pair of scissors. I tell that story both because it's funny to me and also because so many times we make excuses. We make excuses perhaps when we don't want to do something. Right? If you're living with someone, your parents or spouse or a roommate or whoever it may be, and they ask you to take out the trash, and you don't want to take out the trash, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to come up with some sort of excuse as to why you're not going to do it. You're going to make up an excuse as to why you can't do what they're asking you to do. But do we realize how common it is that we make those same kind of excuses to God? God has commanded us to serve Him and to follow Him and to do what He has told us to do. But so many times we make excuses to try and avoid doing what God has told us to do. We see this all throughout Scripture, too. This isn't just a modern-day problem. Think about Gideon. Gideon made excuses to avoid following God into battle against the Midianites. Queen Esther made excuses to not go to talk to the king about saving the people of Israel. Jeremiah made excuses to avoid becoming the prophet that God called him to be. Yet all of these people received instructions of what they should do, and they all tried to make excuses to get out of it. But I think the most blatant example in Scripture that we have of someone trying to make an excuse to get out of doing God's will is Moses. Now, if you're familiar with Moses, you may remember that Moses was a Hebrew, but he was born and lived a very different life than so many of the people of that time period. When he was born, his mother hid him for 3 months to save his life. Because at that time, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt basically, had issued an edict that every single Israelite boy, baby boy, was supposed to be killed. Very wicked, wicked thing to do. But Moses' mother didn't do this. She saved his life and hid him for 3 months. And when she couldn't do it any longer, when she couldn't conceal him any longer, she put him in a basket and put that basket in a river in the hopes that someone would save him from the water and bring him into their home. And through God's powerful and providential plan, that basket found its way to where the Egyptian princess was bathing. And Moses was eventually raised in the house of Pharaoh, essentially the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. He grows up in the palace in a life of luxury. Well, many years later, when he's an adult, one day he leaves the palace and he goes out and he finds the Israelites, who are at this point slaves in Egypt, and he sees them working. And he sees an Egyptian man abusing an Israelite slave. So Moses rises up and kills that Egyptian and buries him in the sand. He goes home and he thinks, I got away with that. Nobody knows about that. Well, he goes out the next day and everyone's like, hey, look, it's Moses. You killed somebody yesterday. And he's like, oh, no. Well, eventually news gets around to Pharaoh, and now Moses is a wanted man. So he flees Egypt. He runs away and he ends up in the land of Midian with a man named Jethro. This is where we're going to pick up today in Exodus chapter 3. If you have a copy of God's Word, go ahead and open it up to Exodus chapter 3. We're going to be in chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4 today. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 10, we find God's call to Moses. Let's read that. Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, it says, Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of a fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then God said, Do not come near. Take the sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. We'll stop there for a moment. God is calling to Moses, and he establishes to Moses, this is God, I am the Lord. He tells Moses, I've heard the cries of my people in Egypt, and it's time for them to leave their chains behind and to enter into that promised land, that land flowing with milk and honey. God says, Moses, you are the man. You are the man who's going to lead my people out of Egypt. Now Moses, he's not going to want to go back to Egypt for several reasons. First of all, he was still probably facing charges for that Egyptian guard that he had murdered. Another thing, he had a family now. He had settled down. He had a wife and children and a job. What was going to happen to all of that if he died in Egypt? But I think maybe just most of all, Moses was scared of going before Pharaoh and going before the people of the Lord. So God has appeared to him and given him this call, this command, you are going to lead my people out of Egypt and to the promised land. Moses is going to start making excuses. He's going to start making excuses as to why that's not actually going to happen. He's going to find some way to avoid it. Normally, when we read through a passage, we read through it. We're going to bounce around a little bit tonight. We're going to do it a little bit differently, and I think you'll see why here in a moment. Again, Moses is going to start making excuses. God gives him this call in the first 10 verses, and now Moses is going to start making excuses. Look at verse 11. Moses' first excuse is in verse 11. Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? All right, he's saying, who am I to do something like this? I'm not important. I'm not qualified. I'm not valuable. Go find somebody else. You've got the wrong guy, God. I'm not the right guy for this job. And then he comes up with another excuse in verse 13. He says in verse 13, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Moses is coming up with this hypothetical situation here where he goes before the people, he tells them that God has sent them to rescue them, and in this hypothetical situation, the people of Israel ask Moses, well, what is the name of the Lord? He's trying to use this hypothetical situation to get out of having to go to Egypt. He's trying to hide behind this what-if question. Jump down to the beginning of chapter 4. Look at chapter 4 and verse 1. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. He says, there's no point, God, in me going back to Egypt. Be a wasted trip. Because I know, God, that the Hebrew nation is going to reject me. The Israelites are going to reject me. They're not going to believe that you sent me here to deliver them. And if they don't believe me, then Pharaoh's not going to believe me. So there's just no point in me going. Let's just put this whole idea on the shelf and send somebody else. Look at verse 10 as well. But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. He says, I'm not a good public speaker, God. Go find somebody else. Go find somebody else who can do a better job of this, who can lead Israel better. I'm not going to be able to convince the people of Israel to follow me. And he says one last thing in verse 13. He said, oh my Lord, please send someone else. At this point, he's not even making excuses. He's just begging. He's just pleading, God, send anybody else. I don't care who, just as long as it's not me. Moses is making excuse after excuse after excuse as to why he could not follow God, as to why he could not obey the command that God had given him. Comes up with every reason that he could possibly think of to try to get out of this. And this passage is so amazing, but it's not amazing because of Moses or what Moses says. Now, this passage is amazing because every time Moses makes an excuse, God has the answer. Every time Moses makes an excuse, God throws that excuse out the window and says it's not valid. Look at verse 12 of chapter 3. Look at Exodus chapter 3 and verse 12. Again, Moses just said, who am I to do this? Look at what God says. God says, but I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought these people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. All right, Moses says, who am I to do this? God says, it doesn't matter who you are, because I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be with you the whole way. And guess what, Moses? When you are back on this mountain, after you've led the people out of Egypt, and you're serving me on this mountain, you're going to think back to this moment and remember that I kept my promise. Again, Moses says, who am I to do this? God says, it doesn't matter who you are because I am with you. And because I am with you, you have everything that you need to succeed. When Moses asked, in this hypothetical situation and the people want to know what your name is, what should I tell them? This what-if question. Look at what God has to say starting in verse 14. Verse 14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. Again, Moses is coming up with this hypothetical situation. What do I do? What do I say if God gives him a script? God tells him exactly what to do, what to say, how to say it. And then he also gives Moses the details of how everything is going to happen. He says, you're going to go to the people of Israel. They're going to listen to you. You're going to gather the elders of Israel, and you're going to go before Pharaoh. And you're going to say, let my people go. And Pharaoh's going to say, I'm not doing that. So God, me, in this instance, God is saying, I will strike Egypt with the plagues. And then Pharaoh will let you go. And when you go, you're going to walk out of there with silver and gold and clothing that the Egyptians gave you. Moses, this is exactly what's about to happen. You don't need to worry about these what-if questions. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to say. Here's what's going to happen. Again, God gave Moses all that he would need to succeed. But Moses still makes another excuse. He claims that no one will listen to him. Look at what God says in chapter 4, verses 2 through 9. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. He said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. God says that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. We'll stop there. Moses claims, God, nobody's going to listen to me. I don't need to go to Egypt. No one's going to listen to me. God says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you 3 miracles to perform. You go there, you say what you need to say, what I told you to say, and if they don't believe you, you do these 3 miracles. You throw your staff on the ground and it becomes a serpent. You pick it up and it becomes a staff again. Put your hand inside your coat, take it out, you've got leprosy. Put it back, take it out again, it's gone. Take some water from the Nile, drop it on the dry ground, and it'll become blood. If they don't believe what you say, show them these signs, and then they'll believe. God is giving Moses everything that he needs to succeed. And yet again, Moses makes an excuse. He says, I'm not a good speaker. Look at how God responds in verse 11. He says, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. And God says, I'm going to tell you what to say. I'm the one who gave you the ability to talk in the first place. I'm going to tell you what to say. Again, Moses has got everything that he needs to do this. But he hasn't been persuaded yet. Because in verse 13, he just starts begging, God, send anybody else. Look at verse 14. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him. and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand the staff with which you shall do the signs. God tells Moses, I have given you everything and more that you will need to accomplish what I'm telling you to do. You have everything that you need to be successful. I will teach you what to say. I have given you these signs. And because you're still afraid, I'll give you your brother Aaron to go alongside you. And of course, God says, I'll be with you too the whole time, Moses. Moses made excuse after excuse, trying desperately to get out of the job that God had given him, to get out of obeying God. But no matter what excuse Moses could think up, God was able to shut it down. No matter what the excuse was, God promised that Moses could do what Moses had thought impossible. And he could do this because, again, God had given him what he had needed to do what God had told him to do. There was no excuse that Moses could think of as to why he couldn't follow God. If we keep reading through the book of Exodus, we see that Moses is persuaded. He is finally convinced to do what God has said. And everything happens exactly the way that God said it would. Moses goes to Israel. The people believe him. They go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't let them go. God sends the 10 plagues. Pharaoh lets them go, and the Israelites leave. Of course, there's also that part where Pharaoh tried to catch them, changed his mind, tried to catch them, and God destroyed the Egyptians in the Red Sea. That incredible miracle of the Red Sea crossing. But the point is, everything happened exactly the way that God said it would. And Moses did what he was supposed to do, even though initially he had made excuses. Because those excuses had been proven to be inadequate. No matter what excuse he made, it didn't matter. God had the answer. Now, it's easy for us to sit here and kind of wag our finger at Moses and say, oh, Moses, ye of little faith, Moses. I wouldn't have made those excuses to God. I would have gone to Egypt right away. Really? If what you were saying is true, then why don't you always do what God has told you to do? If the words that Moses had said were coming out of my mouth, would that be the only time that I would have ever said them? No. Unfortunately, those words would have a pretty familiar feel in my mouth. We cannot condemn Moses for making excuses to God, because we've all done the same thing. We've all done the same thing. We've made excuses to God, either to get out of what we know we need to do or to try to cover up for the fact that we didn't do what we know we should have done. Maybe you've said something like, I'm just too busy to serve God. Maybe you said something like, well, that's someone else's job. Someone else needs to do that. Maybe you said, I'll do that later. Again, we've all made excuses like this to God. Excuses about why we can't do what He's told us to do. But the truth is, none of these excuses really are true at all. We do have enough time to serve God. We just choose to waste that time on other things. It is our job and not someone else's to serve God. And we need to do so now, because we have no guarantee that there is a later. These excuses, I think, are sometimes rooted in laziness or complacency, but there's also times where we make excuses that are rooted in fear and in worry. Maybe we make excuses like, well, I'm just not good enough, or I just don't know enough, or what if people mistreat me because I'm trying to follow God? These fears of inadequacy and these worries of being rejected are very common, unfortunately. And even worse, they often lead Christians to shrink and to shirk their God-given responsibilities, just like Moses tried to do here in Exodus. Moses was worried that the people of Israel and that Pharaoh would reject him. He claimed that he wasn't a good enough public speaker to do what God had told him to do. So many times we try to do something similar. We convince ourselves not to go talk to somebody about Jesus because we think that we don't know enough about him, or that we're not talented enough as a conversationalist or as an evangelist. We're just afraid of what they're going to say if we try to talk to them about Jesus. We convince ourselves not to let God's light shine through us because we think, well, what good is it going to do anyways? We cannot allow these worries and these fears to stop us from doing what we need to do, from serving God, from giving God our all. Because most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, these worries that we have, these fears that we have are completely unfounded. And we end up worrying about things that never truly matter. We imagine these hypothetical situations that never actually happen. We're trying to hide behind those what-if questions like Moses was doing. Again, so many times our fears and our worries that lead us to make excuses that stop us from following God have no merit. We're worrying about things that won't happen. But let's presume for a second that these worries and fears are based on something that's truthful. Let's just imagine for a moment that these fears and worries are correct. Maybe you really don't know enough, or you really aren't talented enough in one area. Well, does that mean that you can just sit back and throw up your hands and say, well, I guess someone else will have to do it because I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I'm not good enough at this. Someone else can do it. No. If you feel like you don't know enough, then do something about it. Study the Bible more. Study by yourself, study with other Christians. I can promise you that there's so many people here in this room right now that if you ask them, they would jump for joy at a chance to study the Scriptures with you. If you feel like you don't know enough, then do something about it. If you feel like you're not good enough at something to serve God, then do something about it. Figure out what talents and gifts God has blessed you with, because we've all been given different ones. And then use those talents and gifts that God has given you to serve Him. And not only that, but you can put in the work to grow and develop in those areas where you feel like you're lacking. Right? Moses here, he said, God, I can't do what you're telling me to do. I'm not a good public speaker. Well, later in his life, we find the book of Deuteronomy. You know what's in the book of Deuteronomy? It's basically just a bunch of speeches that Moses gave to the people of Israel. How's that for being a poor public speaker? He worked on it. He grew in that area. He developed that talent more. And because he was actively working on improving himself in those areas where he felt like he was lacking, those fears of inadequacy eventually disappeared. It wasn't immediately. It took some time. It took some hard work. But Moses was no longer worried about his lack of ability because he trusted in God and he put in the work to get better. Again, if you feel like you're not good enough, if you feel like you don't know enough to serve God, then do something about it. Don't just sit there. We cannot just sit there and make excuses as to why we can't follow God. And that same goes for the worry that we will have that we will be publicly rejected from following God. Yes, we will probably be rejected because we're following God, even by the people that we're caring about. But that does not mean that we should allow that fear to stop us from doing what we know we need to do. Because if we allow the fear of rejection by mankind to stop us from serving God, then ultimately we're rejecting Christ. And we're letting Christ reject us when He comes again. This is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, verses 32 and 33. Matthew chapter 10, verses 32 and 33. Jesus says here, "So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven." Jesus is saying if we're willing to confess Him and serve Him before men, then He will confess us before the Father. But if we deny Christ before men, if we don't serve Him before people, then Jesus will deny us in front of the Father. If we're ashamed to follow Jesus in front of other people, then Jesus will not grant us entry into the heaven, into the kingdom of heaven. Paul reminded the churches of Galatia in Galatians chapter 1 and verse 10 that we're not doing all of this. We're not being a Christian to gain the approval from man. We're not seeking man's approval anymore. We're seeking God's. We're not trying to please man anymore. We're trying to please God. Can't worry about what other people are going to say or think. Again, we don't know how other people are going to react. Most of the time, we're wrong in how we think other people are going to react to something. There's no excuse to not follow God. There's no excuse that we can make either out of things like laziness and complacency or out of things like fear and worry that truly permits us to not do what the Bible tells us to do. We need to get up and follow God. No more making excuses. No more coming up with reasons as to why we should not do what God has said. Just getting up and serving God. Living the way that we ought to live. Treating other people the way that He has treated us. There's no excuse. We need to follow the commands that God has given us. Now, we're not going to do this perfectly. There's going to be a lot of times where we choose to rebel against God, where we choose to do what we know we shouldn't do, or we choose to fail to do what we know we need to do. There's going to be a lot of times where our flesh is still able to convince us to make an excuse and to not serve our God. But thanks be to God, because He knew that we are not perfect. He knew that we're sinful, and that's why He sent Christ to the cross, so that we could have our sins forgiven through the blood that He shed when He died for us. If there's anyone here tonight who's not yet been baptized for the remission of your sins and joined in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, you can do so tonight. Likewise, if there's anyone here tonight who just needs the prayers or the support or the comfort of this church family, so if anything at all that we can do for you, you can let us know by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.